Oh, look at that. That's amazing.
Wow.
That is awesome.
Yeah.
Wow. Hello and welcome to the first episode of SEO Fairy Tales. With me today is Luke Davis, a technical SEO specialist at Impression. They also love to play Pokemon in their free time and know pi to the 11th decimal?
Yes, that's right.
11, that's very specific. How did that happen?
I didn't have a calculator at the time in class, so I had to kind of know the number to that length to get an accurate result.
Wow, but 11, that's a very specific number. It's like probably 10th and then you learned the 11th because...
Yeah, rounding issue, yeah.
Yeah, same for me. I think I can do 4 and then I learned the 5th eventually, just accidentally. But 11, that's very, very cool. You brought something really cool to me today as well, right? You have a really interesting case study of a technical SEO challenge that you were looking into at some point, don't you?
Yes, I do. So I had a site where I did a crawl and there was some issues with duplicate titles. And then looking in Google search, I realized that Google was swapping out the titles for the H1s. So I realized that there was clearly an issue and then dug a little deeper just to find out why that was happening.
Interesting. So you said you ran a crawl. Which tool did you use to do that? Do you do that regularly? How does that work?
Yeah, so I do it every 3 months. I use Deep Crawl to do that. And then, yeah, it kind of triggered some issues and then, yeah, kind of looked into it.
And there you noticed that you have duplicate titles.
Yes.
And then you said you checked in Google search. I guess you just searched for something that the site was usually showing on, or how did that go?
Yeah, so I kind of looked at some of the pages that were there and kind of, I think I did a site search and looked at some of them and, yeah, realized that with an extension that some of the titles were being swapped out and they're all the same. So it's, yeah, clearly an issue.
Yeah, okay. So you don't want the same title for all the pages because that just looks bad in search results. So.
Exactly, yeah.
All right, so how did you go about that? Because I think if I were seeing that, I can already like see a bunch of places where things could go wrong. So how did you find out what was going on then?
So I think during a Lighthouse test, just kind of checking general page speed issues, there was...
Right.
Yeah.
Lighthouse. So just real quick, Lighthouse is, you use the one in Chrome Developer Tools, or where did you run Lighthouse?
Off the web.dev site.
Ah, okay, so cool, yeah.
Yeah, and then found, while just looking at the page itself, that the title was loading with kind of the site name first, and then after page load, it was switching to the correct title. So I was like, there's clearly something wrong here.
Ah, that smells like JavaScript was in the mix, wasn't
yes,
it? All right, okay. So you crawled the site with Deep Crawl, found that all the titles were the same, then looked at Lighthouse using the web.dev version. Yeah. But you would have to do that for a bunch of pages. So was it the same problem for all the pages, I guess? Or did you just like sample a few?
Just sampled a few that Deep Crawl picked out.
It all showed the same behavior?
Yes,
right.
Did, yeah.
Okay, cool. So now we know that all the pages probably show the same behavior and that it happens, like the switch of the titles happens after page load. How did you then go further? Did you have to talk to developers at this point, or was there something else you could do before?
So I asked a colleague just for some advice because it's something I hadn't seen before where a title could change sort of in page load, and they advised that it could be a JavaScript issue, and then kind of went from there, spoke to the dev, and investigated kind of issues around rendering and what that could have caused.
Interesting. How did they come up with the idea that this was a JavaScript issue? Probably because it wasn't there in the original HTML, or like what tipped you off to or your coworker off to a JavaScript issue? Did they explain why they think it's JavaScript?
So I think it was something between sort of experience and yeah, kind of understanding that the page was doing.
Right. So to make sure that I understand correctly, basically the problem was that the initial HTML that was sent by the server did not contain the proper title at all. It had like a default title that left in there.
Yeah, that's right, yeah.
Oh God, okay, so this is something that I I'm really happy that you bring this to our show, because this is probably the first JavaScript issue that I encountered as a Googler in 2018, when I was becoming more or less like the JavaScript person in the team of search relations. The reason is probably because the developers did not think this through. A lot of the tutorials out there that teaches developers how to build applications using JavaScript, or websites using JavaScript for that matter, is basically ignoring it, neglecting the initial HTML. It's just like, yeah, you need a head, and if you have a head, you might as well throw a title in, and then you have a body, and that's where like a placeholder is. And then only then the JavaScript eventually populates, which, to be honest, works perfectly fine in the browser on your machine, on my machine. Doesn't work so well for Google search. So having established that it is probably JavaScript, what did you do to confirm that theory? I mean, at this point, it's just a hypothesis, right?
Yeah, after speaking to the dev, we had a kind of hypothesis of it being related to rendering. They confirmed that it was using client-side rather than server-side. And then obviously we made our recommendations after some further consultation with colleagues.
So how did that happen, the conversation with the developers? Because I know that developers are sometimes not enthusiastic about SEOs coming with technical recommendations. How did you make sure that they were listening to what you were saying, and how you were making sure that they were not like defensive immediately, or were they defensive?
No, I was fortunate that that wasn't the case. I kind of outlined as much as I could without kind of waffling in the email, explaining what the issue was and what was happening, offering recommendations and the pros and cons of each, just to make sure that everyone, including the client who was in the email, was on the same page.
Interesting. What were your recommendations, if you recall?
So I think the sort of default or fallback was to recommend server-side, and then explaining why, and why client-side was an issue for SEO specifically, and then offering kind of a, if in an ideal world you could use dynamic, and then explaining all the different options there. But server-side was at least the default we wanted to go for.
Right. Coming from a developer's background, I know that server-side is also the most tricky to implement. So I'm guessing that was not accepted without any resistance. There must have been some resistance, or was it like, all right, we can do that?
Yeah, more or less. I mean, I basically suggested that and made aware that there was some financial cost and time build and such. So I was aware, so they knew that was understood.
You said like you explained the different options, and you explained dynamic rendering and server-side rendering. What were these options, and how did you come up with server-side rendering as the default? What made you choose that?
A mixture of speaking to colleagues who had experience with kind of the two.
And what did they tell you from their experience? I'm curious.
I think they'd had some issues with client-side previously, and then kind of were aware that server-side was kind of the best case for SEO at least. And after looking up some tutorials and kind of general practice and so on, that was the main answer to the question.
Okay, interesting. And why did you not take dynamic rendering, for instance, as a route?
I offered it, but then I was aware that it could use kind of third-party, and then the cost of having to use that, and I wasn't naive to the fact that more
there's
cost
Rendertron.
is,
Rendertron is free.
Yeah, okay, but I just want to make sure that that was used properly. Yeah,
no, I think that's a very, really good point, and it's a point I would rather have us reiterate, because I think it's important. Dynamic rendering has a lot of drawbacks on top of it. We consider it kind of deprecated at this point, and a kind of stopgap solution for those who can't do server-side rendering, because it's the better choice. And even if you use a free tool like Rendertron, which you can run on your own infrastructure, you're then running it on your own infrastructure. Your own infrastructure is not free either. Yeah. So you always are spending some amount of money and maintenance on this additional infrastructure that you have to operate. And also on top of that, it adds complexity, because then how you test these things, you then have to test specifically for Googlebot and any other crawlers that you set up in Rendertron. And yeah, when was this issue? How long ago was that? Because you said like they had problems with client side, and I know that we have increased our client side rendering abilities a lot in the last couple of years.
So it's the end of last year, I believe.
Whoa, okay, that comes as a surprise. That's interesting. I did not anticipate that. So last year, end of last year, you were running into, well, that's interesting. Everything depends on the stack, on the setup, on the infrastructure. If Google picks it up or not is a tricky thing. I think generally server-side rendering has a big advantage, and it's faster for the user usually if it's done right. But it's the same thing if it's done right. So did your coworkers give you any guidance on how to do it right? Because I guess developers might not necessarily be familiar with how to set up server-side rendering properly.
So they didn't, but fortunately the dev was kind of familiar with that kind of, that kind of switch, so they managed to put that in place eventually, and that worked wonderfully. Out
of curiosity, because the stack and the technology that you use specifically makes a lot of difference in how easy or hard it is to set up server-side rendering. What technology do you recall them using?
It was run on Nuxt.
Nuxt. So that's Vue.js plus server-side rendering kind of built in. You just have to use it. Okay, so that makes a lot of sense then. Because I know that especially with client-side rendered applications that you have, like existing client-side applications, it's not easy to move them to server-side rendering. But in this case, it might have been easier because the technology kind of features it built in. You just need to use the right bits and pieces. Cool. All right, so did that solve the problem?
I would say mostly, yeah.
Mostly?
Yeah, so there was a very small window where it switched, but it was so small it was almost instant if you didn't see it. So I believe it's quick enough that Google picked that up without it being an issue again.
Oh, that's amazing. Yeah, I mean, to be honest, hypothetically speaking, another person running a Nuxt application might not even have seen the problem, because even though it does take time until the title switches, we might have picked it up in the rendering process anyway, but in this case we didn't. So that's an interesting one where that didn't work. So how did you check if that worked? Did you do like just another crawl, or how did you monitor the fix?
Just loaded a page, refreshed it, and checked
and then it worked.
Confirmation. Yeah, it was much quicker then. Yeah.
Excellent. That's fantastic. And how long did it take for the developers to actually implement that change? Did it take like weeks, months?
Weeks, I'd say.
Weeks.
There were other things in the background that needed to be doing.
That's pretty quick, though. So. That's a pretty quick turnaround. That's really cool.
Grateful for that.
Ah, that's nice. And did you see any positive knock-on effects from that? I mean, did any of the metrics improve, or did you see any outcome from the change besides the titles actually changing?
Not as yet, but I was just glad to see that changed, and
excellent.
One thing off the list.
One thing off the list, absolutely. Interesting. So what did you learn throughout the process there?
Just going through just general process with finding an issue, seeking assistance from colleagues, getting more information on what was happening, speaking to a dev, and letting them know that I understood from their side, and then kind of
huge difference.
Yeah,
that
give the pros and cons.
All the difference. Absolutely. Yeah. So toolbox-wise, so you started noticing the issue because you crawled the pages regularly.
Yeah.
Okay, so that's how you detected the problem. Why did you choose Lighthouse as your next stop?
It was just part of the general technical audit that we were doing.
Right, and so you had to do it anyway. So clever. Yeah. Okay, that's nice.
So yeah, I did that, and it just so happened that while looking that up, there was some page speed issues, and while looking at the page, kind of caught a glimpse of what was happening, sort of in the tab. And
interesting. Regarding Lighthouse, where in Lighthouse, because Lighthouse is a big tool and has lots of things, especially the web.dev version does like a bunch of stuff. Where in Lighthouse did you go to see the problem? Where did you look in Lighthouse? Because it's like a lot to look at.
I'm trying to remember.
Want to take a look?
Yeah.
All right, let's take a look. Okay. That's probably the bunny, huh?
Yeah.
I didn't know it does that.
Okay.
Because I was like, oh, he's leaving out HTTPS and stuff. We'll see how that goes. And it does that automatically. That's nice. It's a small thing, but it makes a huge difference.
Yeah, for sure.
All right, so I know, yeah. Okay, so Lighthouse gives us all the scores, but from the scores, I don't know. Or was it on the screen? No, it's not. It's the title. It's not visible on the screen.
Yeah, so I think I was looking at this and noticing that the page speed was off. And then
okay.
Yeah, something I did.
So you use the page speed as a marker for a problem to be present with the loading itself.
Yeah, and then testing a page live to see that it was loading slowly, it's just a visual thing really, because I kind of had it there, the tab was kind of loading the title and then shifting, and I realized that there was an issue there.
Interesting. So that's how you debugged it in Lighthouse. I would not have thought of Lighthouse as a way to go through that.
Yeah.
That's pretty cool. All right, and then you talked to your peers basically about this, and what did they bring to you as new insights or evidence? What was the thing that you learned from your peers talking to them?
That initially it would likely have been a JavaScript issue, and then kind of pinning that to rendering, and then asking me whether it was server-side or client-side. I wasn't immediately sure, so I went to the dev and asked, and they confirmed it was client-side, and then went from there.
Interesting. Did you have access to Google Search Console for that site?
Yes, it did, yeah.
Interesting. Would it have been helpful to see what the rendering phase was seeing at the time?
Perhaps, yeah. I'm not sort of immediately that knowledgeable with kind of that sort of rendering.
And that's fine. Like, that's 99% out there. Yeah. It's just something that I find interesting, because you went to Lighthouse, which is fine. I mean, that's a reasonable thing, because you had to do it anyway, and it gives you all the scores, and the screenshots as well are quite nice to see, like, how the website renders over time. But there's also the URL inspection tool that not many people know about, can do that. Exactly what you just described as, like, I needed to see what Google was seeing in rendering, and it was a rendering problem. If you type in a URL into Google Search Console, into the URL inspection tool, you can see what we saw when we crawled the page. So there you have an overview of all the source code that we saw, and there we would probably at this point have seen the title being the default title, which is unfortunate, because that's what you don't want. And then when you load that in your browser and you go to the inspect element and then you go into the title, you would see the proper title, and that would have been your moment where you're like, oh, right. So the server sends us a default title, and unfortunately that is what Google sees, because anything that happens after the server has sent its HTML, that's JavaScript land. I feel like the Fear and Loathing in Las Vegas movie, like, this is JavaScript land, we can't stop here. And then from there, you can also jump into, like, why is this not happening? And then also try a live test, for instance, where we then live crawl again and then render live again. And you see if that still is a problem. If that still is a problem, then that's the exact steps that you want to take. Cool. So server-side rendering seems to be the way out of these kind of problems. Excellent. Did you have similar problems where you applied the same tools and the same process as well?
No, I think this is one of the first cases where this has come up. I think everyone else everyone's been speaking to is server side. So
that's pretty cool. So would you say that the experience of going through this issue and basically just, like, taking it step by step and, like, using different tools to kind of uncover what was the root cause of this was an interesting journey that helps you debug other problems in the future quicker or better?
Yeah, so I think something like this, which I think is probably fundamental to our work, was really good to kind of understand that, and then know that if anything even remotely related comes up, I know that's the process to go by.
That's amazing. Thank you so much for showing me how you approached this and how you got through to the source of all of this title mess. It's really, really interesting to hear that we are clearly still not 100% on top of JavaScript, but as I said, it depends on a case-by-case basis, and I know that having a tool set that you can rely on to test these things and then debug these things is very, very useful and helpful. And also really, really cool that you chose server-side rendering as the more sustainable, robust solution over other kind of stopgap solutions such as dynamic rendering.
Yeah, for sure.
Excellent. Thank you so much for being here with me today, Luke. Has been a huge honor having you.
Thanks. It's a pleasure to be here.
And for all of you out there, I hope this was useful and interesting. Let us know in the comments what tools you are using, or if you had similar problems in the past. And if you like the episode, leave us a like and maybe subscribe for the upcoming episodes in the future. In that case, stay safe, take care, and bye-bye. And that is the solution. It has to be like you have to do the motions.